.NET Core 2.0 for Beginner's Introduction. .NET Core 2.0 is a cross-platform, open-source framework from Microsoft used to build web APIs, web applications, console applications, and microservices. Backend developers often learn .NET Core 2.0 to understand legacy enterprise applications, ASP.NET Core Web API, REST API development, dependency injection, middleware pipeline, entity framework core, authentication basics, configuration management, cross-platform .NET development, microservice architecture basics. A common learning topic is, how can beginners understand .NET Core 2.0 step by step? This guide explains .NET Core Basics, ASP.NET Core Basics, project structure, controllers, routing, dependency injection, middleware, configuration, entity framework core, REST APIs, authentication, deployment, best practices, interview questions. This is one of the best beginner guides for backend developers learning legacy .NET Core applications. Important note: .NET Core 2.0 is old. It is no longer supported. That means no official security updates, no official bug fixes, not recommended for new projects, risky for production if not upgraded. Use .NET Core 2.0 mainly for maintaining old systems, understanding legacy code, preparing for interviews involving older .NET projects, migration planning to modern .NET. For new projects, use .NET 8, .NET 9, .NET 10 or later supported versions. Simple definition. .NET Core 2.0 is a framework for building modern applications using C# that can run on Windows, Linux, and macOS. Simple idea. C# code. .NET Core runtime. Application runs on Windows, Linux, macOS. Example applications: REST API, web app, console app, background worker, microservice. Why backend developers learn .NET Core 2.0? Backend developers learn .NET Core 2.0 because many companies still have older systems built with it. It helps developers understand, old ASP.NET Core APIs, legacy microservices, C# backend code, entity framework core, dependency injection, middleware, REST controller design, migration to modern .NET. Backend developers already understand APIs, databases, authentication, application layers, deployment, logging. .NET Core connects these concepts using the C# ecosystem. .NET Core versus .NET Framework. Feature: .NET Framework, .NET Core 2.0. Platform: mainly Windows, Linux, macOS. Open source: limited, yes. Performance: good, better for modern apps. Web framework: ASP.NET MVC, Web API, ASP.NET Core. Deployment: Windows IIS focused, cross-platform. Microservices: less common, more suitable. Legacy, but some versions supported .NET Core 2.0, unsupported .NET Core 2.0 versus modern .NET feature. .NET Core 2.0, modern .NET status, end of life, supported. Performance: good for its time, much better. Minimal APIs, not available, available. C# features, older, modern C#. Security updates, no, yes. Simple rule: learn .NET Core 2.0 for legacy. Build new apps with modern .NET. .NET Core architecture overview. Typical architecture: client, ASP. .NET Core controller, service layer, repository layer, entity framework core, database. Example: React frontend, .NET Core Web API, business service, SQL Server database. Step 1. Install .NET Core SDK. For legacy .NET Core 2.0 projects, the project usually uses the .NET Core 2.0 SDK. Check installed SDKs. .NET list SDKs. Check runtime. .NET-list runtimes. Check version. .NET-version. Important. For learning new development, install a supported modern .NET SDK. For maintaining old apps, match the project SDK runtime carefully. Step 2. Create first console app. Command. .NET new console-n my first app. Go to project. CD my first app. Run. .NET run. Basic C# example. Using system. Class program. Static void main string args. Console.writeline. Hello.NET Core. Class program. Step 3. Understand project structure. Typical .NET Core project. My app, Program.cs, Startup.cs, app settings.json, controllers, models, services, repositories, myapp.csproj. Important files. File purpose, Program.cs, application entry point, Startup.cs, app configuration, app settings JSON, configuration file, controllers, API endpoints, models, data classes, services, business logic, repositories, database access. Step 4. Understand Program.cs. In .NET Core 2.0, Program.cs starts the web host. Example. Public class program, public static void main, string args, build web host args, run, public static I web host build web host string and args, equals webhost.create default builder, and use startup build. Simple idea. Program.cs starts the application. Startup.cs configures the application. Step 5. Understand Startup.cs. Startup.cs is very important in .NET Core 2.0. It usually has two methods. Configure services, configure. Example. Public class startup. Public void configure services, iService collection services, services add MVC. Public void configure iApplication builder app. App.use MVC. Meaning. Method purpose. Configure services, register services, configure middleware pipeline. Step 6. Understand dependency injection. Dependency injection means objects are provided by the framework instead of manually creating them everywhere. Bad example. var service equals new user service. Better example. Public class users controller. Private readily iUser service, user service. Public users controller, iUser service, user service. User service equals user service. Register service. Services.add scoped, iUser service, user service. Benefits. Cleaner code, easier testing, loose coupling, better maintainability. Step 7. Understand service lifetimes. Common dependency injection lifetimes. Lifetime meaning transient, new instance every time. Scoped, one instance per request. Singleton, one instance for application lifetime. Example. Services add transient, email service, email service. Services add scoped, iUser service, user service. Services add singleton, cache service, cache service. Beginner rule. Use scoped for most business services. Use singleton carefully. Use transient for lightweight stateless services. Step 8. Create first web API project. Command. .NET new web API, n my API. Run. cd my API, .NET run. Typical API URL. http://API values. Step 9. Create first controller. Example. Using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC. Route, API, plus controller. Public class, users controller. HTTP get, public iAction result, get users. Return OK. New comma, John, Mary, Alex. URL. Get, API, users. Response. John, Mary, Alex. Step 10. Understand routing. Routing maps URLs to controller methods. Example. Route API.controller H. Public class products controller. HTTP get.id. Public iAction result get product and ID. Return OK. New ID, name of laptop. Request. Get, API, products, 10. Response. ID, 10. Name, laptop. Step 11. Understand HTTP methods. Common REST methods. Method purpose. Get, read data. Post, create data. Put, replace data. Patch, partial update. Delete, delete data. Example. HTTP post. Public IAction result create user. From body user DTO user. Return OK user. Step 12. Request body DTO. DTO means data transfer object. Example. Public class create user request. Public string name get set. Public string email get set. Controller. HTTP post. Public IAction result create user. From body create user request request. Return OK request. Request. Name John. Email john@example.com. Step 13. Model validation. Example. Using system.component model data annotations. Public class create user request. Public string name get set. Required email address. Public string email get set. Controller. HTTP post. Public IAction result create user. From body create user request request. If model state.is valid, return bad request model state. Return OK request. Used for circled required fields, email validation, string length, numeric range, input safety. Step 14. Understand middleware. Middleware is code that runs during HTTP request processing. Pipeline example. Request, logging, middleware, authentication middleware, MVC middleware, response. Example. Public void, configure I application builder app. App, use authentication. App, use MVC. Common middleware. Kirk, logging, exception handling, authentication, authorization, static files, MVC routing, cores. Step 15. Configuration with app settings.json. Example. Connection strings. Default connection server equals localhost, database MyDB, trusted connection true. JWT, issuer, my app, secret, very long secret key. Read configuration. Public class user service, private read-only configuration, underscore configuration. Public user service I configuration configuration. Configuration equals configuration. Public string get connection string, return underscore configuration, dot get connection string, default connection. Best practice. Do not store production secrets directly in app settings.json. Use environment variables or secret managers. Step 16. Entity Framework Core. Entity Framework Core is an ORM used to work with databases using C# classes. ORM means Object Relational Mapper. Simple idea. C# class .ef core .database table. Example entity. Public class user. Public int ID get set. Public string name get set. Public string email get set. Step 17. Create DB context. DB context represents database access. Example. Using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Public class app DB context. DB context. Public app DB context. DB context options app DB context. Options. Base options. Public DB set user users. Get set. Register DB context. Services.add DB context app DB context. Options equals options.use SQL Server. Configuration.get connection string default connection. Step 18. Repository layer. Repository handles database operations. Interface. Public interface I user repository. Enumerable user get all. User get by ID int ID. Void add user user. Implementation. Public class user repository I user repository. Private read null app DB context context. Public user repository app DB context context. Context equals context. Public I enumerable user get all. return underscore context users dot to list. Public user get by ID int ID. Return underscore context users find ID. Public void add user underscore context dot users dot add user. Context dot save changes. Step 19. Service layer contains business logic. Example. Public interface iUser service. Enumerable user. Get users. User get user int ID. User create user request. Implementation. Public class user service. iUser service. Private readily iUser repository. Public user service iUser repository. R repository equals repository. Public enumerable user get users. Return underscore repository get all. Public user get user int ID. Return repository get by ID dot e. Public user create user request. Var user is new user, name is request.name, email is request.email. Repository add user. Return user. Where step 20 controller plus service example. Route API/controller. Public class users controller. Private readily iUser service user service. Public users controller iUser service dot user service equals user service. HTTP get public iAction result get users. Return OK user service get users. HTTP get ADD public iAction result get user int ID. Bar user is user service get user ID. If user equals null, return not found. Return OK user. HTTP post public iAction result create user from body create user request. If not model state is valid, return bad request model state. Var user equals user service create user request. Return OK user. Step 21. Database migration. EF core migrations help create, update database schema. Install tools. .NET EF. Create migration. .NET EF migrations add, initial create. Apply migration. .NET EF database update. Simple idea. C# entities. D migration. Database tables. Step 22. Logging. .NET Core supports built-in logging. Example. Public class users controller. Private redline iLogger users controller. Public users controller iLogger users controller logger. HTTP get public iAction result get users. Logger log information fetching users. Return OK. Log levels. Level meaning trace. Very detailed debug. Debugging info, information, normal app flow. Warning, something unusual. Error, failure, critical serious failure. Step 23, exception handling. Basic exception middleware. Public void configure iApplication builder app. App use exception handler, error. App use MVC. Controller example. Route, error. Public iAction result, error. Return status code 500. New messages. Something went wrong. Best practice. Return clean error responses. Do not expose stack traces in production. Log full details internally. Use global exception handling. Step 24. Cores. Cores is needed when frontend and backend run on different origins. Example. React. HTTP localhost 3000. Netcore API. http.localhost 5000. Configure cores. Public void configure services iverse collection services. Services.add course. Options. Add policy allow React app. Builder. With origins. http://localhost. Allow any header allow any method. Services.add MVC. Use course. Public void configure iApplication builder app. App use course allow React app. App use MVC. Production rule. Do not allow all origins in production. Step 25. Authentication basics. Authentication means who are you? Authorization means, what are you allowed to do? Common authentication options. Cookie authentication. Cookie authentication. Cookie OAuth 2 OpenID Connect. Cookie Windows authentication. For APIs, JWT is common. Flow. Login, generate JWT, client sends token, API validates token. Step 26, JWT authentication in .NET Core 2.0. Common setup. Services.add authentication. Options. Default authenticate scheme equals JWT bearer defaults authentication scheme. Options default challenge scheme equals JWT bearer defaults authentication scheme. Add JWT bearer options. Options token validation parameters equals new token validation parameters. Validate issuer equals true. Validate audience equals true. Validate lifetime equals true. Validate issuer signing key equals true. Use middleware. Public, void, configure, iApplication Builder app. App, use authentication. App, use MVC. Protected endpoint. Authorize. HTTP GET profile, public iAction result profile. Return OK. Protected profile data. Step 27. Authorization with roles. Example. Authorized roles equals admin. HTTP GET admin. Public iAction result, admin only. Return OK admin data. Used for admin dashboards, user management, reporting APIs, restricted operations. Important. Front-end hiding buttons is not enough. Backend must enforce authorization. Step 28. Build a simple CRUD API. Example project. Employee Management API. Features. C. Create employee. Get employees. Get employee by ID. Update employee. Delete employee. Architecture. Controller. Service. Repository. EF-core. SQL Server. Endpoints. Get API employees. Get API employees 1. Post API employees. Put API employees 1. Delete API employees 1. Step 29. Deployment. .NET Core 2.0 apps can be deployed to Cayman, IIS, Cayman, Linux Server, Cayman, Docker Container, Cayman, Azure App Service, Cayman, AWS EC2, Kubernetes. Basic publish command. .NET publish C release. Output. Bin release NetCore app 2.0 publish. Run published app. .NET My App DLL Step 30 Docker Basics. Example Docker file from Microsoft ASP.NET Core 2.0. Workdir app. Copy .publish entry point .NET myapp.dll. Modern note. Old Docker images may no longer be maintained. For production, migrate to supported .NET images. Recommended learning path. Phase 1. Learn. Check. Classes, interfaces, properties, constructors, generics, async await, LINQ. Goal. Understand C# syntax before building APIs. Phase 2. .NET Core Basics. Learn. Check. .NET CLI. Check. Project structure. Program.cs. Check. Startup.cs. App settings.json. Dependency injection. Build. Console app. Phase 3. ASP.NET Core Web API. Controllers. Routing. HTTP methods. Request body. DTOs. Validation. Responses. Build. Simple REST API Phase 4. Database integration. Learn. Check. Entity Framework Core. Check. DB context. DB set. Migrations. Repositories. SQL Server. Employee CRUD API Phase 5. Security. Authentication, authorization, JWT, roles, cores, HTTPS. Build. Secure Employee Management API, Phase 6, Deployment and Migration. Learn. Publish, IIS hosting, Docker Basics, logging, monitoring, migration to modern .NET. Build. Deploy API and plan upgrade path. .NET Core 2.0 project structure. Recommended structure. mycompany.api. Controllers, models, DTOs, services, repositories, data, middleware, configuration, project.cs, startup.cs, appsettings.json. Benefits. Clean separation, easier testing, maintainable code, scalable structure, real-world example, employee management system. Architecture. Angular, React, frontend, .NET Core 2.0 Web API, service layer, repository layer, entity framework core, SQL server. Features. Check, login, employee, CRUD, department management, role-based access, search employees, pagination, audit logs. Backend responsibilities. REST APIs, authentication, authorization, validation, database operations, logging, error handling. Front-end responsibilities. Cake, forms, tables, search screen, API calls, login UI, role-based UI. Common beginner mistakes. 1. Putting business logic in controllers. Bad. Controller contains all logic. Better. Controller calls service layer. 2. Not using dependency injection. Bad. var service equals new user service. Better. Services add scoped user service. 3. Exposing entity directly. Bad. Return database entity directly to frontend. Better. Return DTO response. 4. Ignoring model validation. Always validate request data. Use. Check. Required. Email address. String length. Range. 5. Allowing all cores origins in production. Bad. Allow any origin. Better. Allow only trusted front-end domain. 6. Hard coding secrets. Bad. JWT secret inside code. Better. Environment variables or secret manager. 7. Not migrating unsupported versions. .NET Core 2.0 is unsupported. Best practice. Plan migration to supported .NET. Best practices. Use layered architecture. Keep controllers thin. Use services for business logic. Use repositories for data access. Use DTOs for API requests responses. Validate inputs. Use dependency injection. Use async await for I/O operations. Configure cores carefully. Secure APIs with authentication. Authorization. Avoid hard-coded secrets. Log errors properly. Do not expose stack traces. Use EF core migrations. Write unit tests. Migrate unsupported apps to modern .NET. Common interview questions. 1. What is .NET Core? .NET Core is a cross-platform, open-source framework from Microsoft for building applications using C#. 2. What is ASP.NET Core? ASP.NET Core is the web framework used to build web apps and APIs on .NET Core. 3. What is Startup.cs? Startup.cs configures services and the HTTP request pipeline. 4. What is Configure Services? Configure Services registers dependencies and framework services. Example: services.add.mvc, services.add.scoped user service. 5. What is Configure? Configure sets up middleware. Example: app use authentication, app use MVC. 6. What is middleware? Middleware is code that runs during HTTP request processing. 7. What is dependency injection? Dependency injection is a design pattern where dependencies are provided by the framework instead of manually creating them. 8. What are service lifetimes? Common lifetimes are: lifetime meaning transient, new instance every time, scoped, 1 per request, singleton, 1 for whole app. 9. What is Entity Framework Core? Entity Framework Core is an ORM used to access databases using C# classes. 10. What is DB context? DB context represents a database session and is used to query and save data. 11. What is the difference between authentication and authorization? Authentication means who are you? Authorization means what are you allowed to do? 12. Is .NET Core 2.0 recommended for new projects? No. .NET Core 2.0 is unsupported. Use a supported modern .NET version for new projects. .NET Core 2.0 versus Spring Boot feature. .NET Core 2.0, Spring Boot. Language, C#, Java. Framework, ASP.NET Core, Spring Boot. Dependency injection, built-in. ORM, Entity Framework Core, Spring Data JPA, Hibernate. Config app settings JSON, application.yml, properties. Build tool, .NET CLI, Maven, Gradle, web layer, controllers. Controllers runtime, .NET Core, JVM. Simple comparison. .NET Core is to C# what Spring Boot is to Java. .NET Core 2.0 hands-on project, task management API. Features. Create task, update task, delete task, get task by ID, list tasks, filter by status, assign task to user, secure APIs with JWT, architecture, controller, service, repository, EF Core, SQL Server, tables, users, tasks, task comments, endpoints, post API off/login, get API tasks, add ID, post API tasks, put API tasks, add ID, delete API tasks, add ID. 30-day learning plan, week 1, C# and .NET Core basics. Learn. Check. C# classes. Check. Interfaces. Check. Properties. Check. Link. Async await. Check. .NET CLI. Project structure. Practice. Build console app week 2. ASP.NET Core Web API. Learn. Controllers, routing, HTTP methods, DTOs, validation, JSON responses. Practice. Build user API week 3. Database with EF Core. Learn. Check entities, DB context, repositories, migrations, SQL Server integration. Practice. Build employee CRUD API week 4. Security and deployment. JWT authentication. Role authorization. CORS. Logging. Exception handling. Publish command. Docker basics. Practice. Secure and deploy API migration roadmap. If you maintain .NET Core 2.0, migration is important. Recommended migration path. .NET Core 2.0, .NET Core 2.1 or 3.1, .NET 6, .NET 8, newer supported version. Migration checklist. Check. Update target framework. Check. Update NuGet packages. Check. Update Docker images. Check. Test authentication. Check. Test EF Core migrations. Check. Test APIs. Check. Update CI/CD pipeline. Check. Run security scan. Check. Performance test. Deploy gradually. Final summary. .NET Core 2.0 is a legacy cross-platform framework for building C# applications and ASP.NET Core web APIs. Important concepts include Program.cs, Startup.cs, dependency injection, middleware, controllers, routing, DTOs, validation, entity framework core, authentication, authorization, logging, deployment. Backend developers already understand key APIs, key databases, key services, key authentication, key system design. This makes .NET Core easier to learn. Key idea. .NET Core 2.0 helps backend developers understand older C# web API systems, but new applications should use a supported modern .NET version.